Hey, it's Scott Petrak with another episode of the Brown Zone Coverage Podcast. We're less than 4 weeks away from the draft. Private workouts and pro days have taken center stage, and the rumor mill keeps churning. Meanwhile, the Browns remain in the market for a veteran quarterback. It won't be Russell Wilson, and the options are dwindling. Here to discuss is Tom Withers, longtime Associated Press writer, who's once again filling in for Dave Chudowski, who's on the mend. Hey, Tommy.
Hey Scott, how you doing, bro?
I'm good. I'm good. What's going on with
Everybody
you?
thinks, everybody thinks March Madness is about basketball, but you and I know better, right? In the never-ending cycle of Brown stories, here we go. I think Kirk Cousins was just putting in cable at my next door neighbor's house.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. You're a Westlake guy. Did you run into
Yeah,
Kirk yesterday on your bike ride?
yeah, it was so yeah. So that started on as you know, it started on X. I've gotten better at calling it that, by the way. Last night with that picture of him at the local Chipotle, and some people tried to quickly squash it. And then I reached out to my son, who's a Chipotle enthusiast, and I was like, "Is that Westlake? How do we know?" And so I was trying to do all the tracing that you and I have to do all the time, via social media, and then made a phone call, and then yeah, then I talked to you as a matter of fact, or I texted you, and yeah, we got to confirm that Kirk Cousins was in town. Kind of a surprise.
Yeah, it's weird though because and then he quote tweeted it, and
Yeah,
said something about his order. But I've been told he wasn't here to visit the Browns. And
right.
then I was told from somebody in his camp that it had nothing to do with the NFL. So who knows? I mean, obviously you people want to connect the dots and
Yeah,
I could be being lied to. Um, and I don't know exactly how that would work either because he's under contract with the Falcons. So the Falcons would have to give him permission to seek a
yeah, there'd be
trade.
tampering otherwise, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I don't know if they've done that. For now, they're hanging on to him. I'm sure they would love to trade him at some point. Kirk said he's not going to go anywhere till after the draft anyway because he wants to see if a team drafts a quarterback high, because then he doesn't want to be in the same spot he was last year with Michael Penix Jr. in Atlanta. So it was just weird. Right now, I'm considering it just as a weird coincidence that he happened to be in Westlake. But it
Yeah.
certainly got a lot of people talking. I know that.
It goes into the Bill Cowher
Yeah,
shopping for houses in Strongsville bucket, right? Yeah,
that's
it's just
exactly
a.
right.
I think you're right, Scott. I think it's just just a unique coincidence. I'm not exactly sure why he's in town either. I heard there's some kind of maybe some kind of trade show or something at the IX Center, or I don't know. There's all kinds of theories going around. But yeah, some pretty obvious connections that we've made with him and the Browns. His relationship with Stefanski, obviously, that he's on the outs, if you will, in Atlanta, which seems to be willing to hold on to him as a pricey backup. You and I talked about this off the cast for a little bit, just in terms of whether or not it would be an investment the Browns would be willing to make. And I don't see that. What do you think there's any kind of plausible reason for them to maybe pursue him as we go forward?
I think if they don't take a quarterback at number two,
Yeah,
so no
then
Cam
everything's
Ward, no
open,
Shador
right?
Sanders, and then the board falls a certain way, which means maybe they don't get their, let's call him number three quarterback at number 33, whoever that is. Let's say
Right.
Jackson Dart and Tyler Shuck are already gone, and now you're sitting at 33, and you don't like your
Fair.
quarterback options, so you wind up taking somebody later. If it's Will Howard or Kyle McCord, somebody that you're not sure is going to be your franchise
Developmental
guy.
guy.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Then you go revisit Kirk Cousins, and then it becomes how does
Yeah.
the salary fit? And they're not. I don't see any way they pay $27.5 million, which is what his salary is for 2025.
Right.
They would inherit that in the trade. Now, could they get the Falcons to take 12 of that $1 million, and that affects the draft pick that the Browns give in exchange in the trade? I could see
Yeah.
that. I,
And
you know, I,
are there any limit? So, Scott, let me ask you,
yeah.
you're more aware of the financial components of it. Are there any limitations on any kind of payment deferrals, or can that be worked out between the teams? Like, are there any league restrictions on how much a team, can pay or is forced to eat or whatever you want to call it?
It's a great question, Tom. I don't think it's as flexible as the NBA, right? Because I think the
Right.
NBA's, I don't understand those rules at all.
Yeah.
But I know that you can work out some things in
Right.
this situation. It's a strict salary thing. Like I think it's difficult to finagle the salary cap
Mm,
But from an actual salary standpoint, in the cash, and his salary is $27.5 million. That's what he's getting in 2025. So I believe the Falcons could just say,
yeah,
okay, we're going to pay him 10 of it now, and then it reduces the number on the Browns. I don't think I think that's strictly or completely within the NFL rules. So there is some room to maneuver there in the discussions, or the Browns could just wait and hope that Atlanta eventually cuts him because they don't want him around if he doesn't want to be there and he doesn't want to be there as the backup. Atlanta seems committed not to do that and is hoping someone trades for him. And who knows? Depending on how the Aaron Rodgers Pittsburgh thing works out,
yeah.
Pittsburgh might need a veteran quarterback.
That's a great call.
You
Yeah,
know, Minnesota, it probably wouldn't be the starter because they feel committed to JJ McCarthy, but they probably want to add somebody else. So I think there's other options. I don't think it's just the Browns with Atlanta, at least as of right now. But I would
got
say
you.
that he remains a possibility. And
Yeah,
when we get through those 3 days in April, the next story could be Kirk Cousins, right? It depending on
got you.
how those 3 days go.
Yeah, well, we could scratch Russell Wilson off the list, right? With the
Yeah.
signing in New York. I never thought that that was a real option here, Scott, to be honest with you. I thought from day one that he was kind of using the Browns. I thought his leverage to re-sign with the Steelers, but then he ends up going to New York. Did that surprise you at all?
Well, a little bit, Tom, especially because they just signed Jameis Winston.
Yeah, there you
So
go.
you bring in two veteran guys, and I know that they still have the option of drafting a guy high. And if Shadur's there at 3, I think they might take him, which is kind of a weird dynamic. And you get two veteran guys that are big time veteran guys. I mean, Russell Wilson's 10-time Pro Bowl or Super Bowl winner. Jameis Winston, we know all about him, but he is a
Right.
former #1 pick with a huge personality. All of a sudden, could you imagine a quarterback
Yeah.
room with Russ, Jameis, and Shadur? I mean, and I don't think that's outlandish. And
Yeah.
the Giants signed these
No, I don't think
guys.
so either.
Yeah, and the Giants signed these guys in case they don't have that option at number 3. I mean, because the two quarterbacks could go off the
Right.
board. But if the Browns go another way, and we'll talk about Abdul Carter in a minute, all of a sudden you're looking
Yeah.
at a really interesting quarterback room, and our guy Brian Daboll trying to figure out how he's going to win some games and save a job.
And I tell you what, as a former New York media member, oh my God,
Oh,
the storylines there and the back pages of the Post and the Daily News or what have you with that collection there, never mind, the Dion factor if it ends up becoming Shador. So
right.
yeah, it's interesting. It's obviously it's the Browns are somewhat attached to it, like you said, only because the Giants are sitting right behind them on the board.
Yeah, and Tom, I liked the idea of Wilson, and I think better than a lot of people do. I know our buddy
Yeah.
Zach Jackson. I listened to his podcast yesterday when I was out doing a half doing. I don't know if you could call it a workout or whatever I was doing, but and he doesn't think Russell Wilson would have been able to win here, and doesn't think he was the answer at quarterback. And I feel a little differently. I think he's still got something in him, and I think we talked about this. I think there's a perception that he's phony, but there's something
Yeah.
about him leadership
Yeah.
wise that I think would have had a
Yeah.
positive influence on the Browns. Now, obviously, that ship has sailed, but it'll be interesting to see if he's a guy in New York. Can he have any success trying to turn them around if he's a starter? I listened to his press conference. I was in the car the other day, and
Yeah.
there's something about him. Like I'm drawn to him. Like I think there's something infectious about. I think it's genuine optimism, and
Yeah.
it's always this optimism, and maybe that wears you down after a
Well, and I
while. But
think,
I kind of like listening.
yeah. And I think he's one of those guys too, Scott, who's gotten to the, pardon the golf analogy, but he's on the 17th tee
Sure.
of his career, right? And he's kind of looking at, okay, what's next for me? And, there is that perception and that narrative out there about him. And, maybe he is the perfect bridge quarterback, that mentor type. I'm sure he had some quarterbacks, throughout his career that kind of helped him along. So maybe he becomes that guy in New York.
Right.
And, we saw last year that, Jameis can be that guy to a degree, right? I mean, he's a good guy in the locker room, and I think that some of that'll probably rub off on Russell as well. So I'm with you. I thought he would have been an okay option here, in terms of where the Browns are right now in this ongoing quest to find the franchise QB.
Right. And last thing on him, there's no doubt that he's not the same guy he was. And
No.
the Pittsburgh was bad at the end of last season. They lost their last,
Yeah.
whatever, 4 or 5 in a row. But I still see some things there that I thought if they needed to, and that's the way they went, that they might have been able to win 10 games with him. And maybe
Right.
I'm completely off base. Maybe he'll go to New York and he doesn't make it through 6 weeks as a starter. But it'll be interesting to see, kind of a
Yeah,
what if with the Browns.
no doubt.
So, like I said, we're less than 4 weeks away from the draft, Tom. Right
Yeah.
now, what do you? There's so many questions, so many
Where
ways
am
I
I
could
at?
go with this.
Yeah.
But yeah,
You
right now, where
know,
do you go number two?
yeah, you know what, Scott? You and I have done this long enough, and it turns into they call it the silly season or March Madness or
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it. There's so much flying around, and as I pointed out in a tweet the other day, and I was trying to have a little bit of fun with people, but like, the misinformation and the text chains, and as you know, teams outwardly lie, Scott. They just throw stuff out there to get everybody going on another trail to get them away from what is really real. And what's really real still for the Browns is that they need a quarterback. And I still haven't gotten off the idea that if Cam Ward goes at 1, that the Browns would take Shedeur Sanders at 2, only because they need a quarterback. It's not the only thing missing, but it's the biggest piece missing. It's the biggest piece that's been missing here for going on 30 years, right? And so I can't get away from them, falling in love with, either or both of those quarterbacks. And if Ward goes off the board at number 1, and who knows, maybe that visit down to Coral Gables to have him work out, and Jimmy Haslam coming along for the private workout meant something. Maybe there's a world where they do move up to number 1 and they take the best quarterback on the board. What I'm trying to find out, and I'm trying to do some snooping behind the scenes, much like you are, even though I'm not nearly as plugged in as I used to be. Is I'm trying to find out, how much do they like these two guys? And is there a big gap between them, Scott? You and I, we always talk quarterbacks during the year, and, we like quarterbacks for various traits. And you and I have talked about this a lot. I watched both of them enough last year that I'd be fine with one of them at number 2. And it's just up to the Browns to figure out whether they like the guy enough to make that kind of move.
I feel the same way, Tom.
Where are you at? You still feel the same way? You feel like quarterback's still the guy? Yeah.
I don't know what they're going to do. Um, I feel
Yeah.
like Sanders, like we talked about, it'd be interesting to see how the Browns feel. Is there a gap between Ward and Sanders? I mean, the whole world thinks there is, but that doesn't
Yeah.
mean the Browns think the same way. And then what's the gap between
Correct.
Sanders and whoever 3 and 4 is, right? Whether that's Darth or Shook or whoever the Browns have as their third guy. How big is that gap?
Yeah.
Because I think that matters with how they play the board. Um, I like Ward just for the physical gifts. I like a guy who throws it, and he throws it really well.
Same.
So he'd be my number
Same.
1.
Yeah.
But I'd be fine with Sanders at number 2. And the accuracy is really strong. He's tough. He stands in the pocket and delivers the ball. He's clutch. He had some, fourth quarter drives that won games. The Dion thing doesn't scare me, and
Me neither.
I like the lineage.
Yeah.
Dion talks about putting him on the board when he was a kid and going through, defenses and how to
Yeah.
read that. I
Yeah.
think he's really smart, and those are the things you can't evaluate, or it's more difficult to evaluate how smart he is, the decision making. It's easy to see how strong a guy's arm is and how quick he moves. Right? Anybody can figure that out. It's the other stuff is the Italian evaluators and the scouts. Okay, does he make up for that with unbelievable decision making? And
Yeah.
that's where Shedeur says, yes, that's my strength. And
Yeah.
if that's true, that matters so much. And it matters more than a big arm. And the accuracy matters more than a big arm. As much as I love a big arm, we've seen plenty of big arm guys that are busts because they don't see the field well enough and they don't make the quick enough decisions and they don't throw it accurately enough. So if Shedeur does all those
Right.
things great, I think that makes up for whatever limitations physically. And I think he throws it well enough. I've seen enough throws where I go, okay, there's enough zip on that ball.
Yeah. He's on time. Right. Yeah.
And I'll say this,
Let's go.
when they go to this pro day, right? So his pro day is next Friday. So I
Right.
assume the Browns will be there, and somebody from the Browns will be there. And then the Browns are supposed to private workout or at least meet with him. I don't know if he's doing workout, but whatever. I think it's important for a guy where there are questions about his arm strength. That's where I think the throwing in person matters, and the pro day matters, and a private workout matters. Because Kevin Stefanski has not seen him throw live, as far as I know. And I'm trying to think of a situation where he would have, and he didn't throw at the combine. He wasn't at the Senior Bowl. He didn't throw at the Shrine Bowl. So this would be, Andrew Berry probably scouted him, but Kevin Stefanski hasn't
Yeah.
in person, right? So I think that's why the pro day is important and private workouts are important because you do get to see certain things live. And we talk about it all the time. When you see a guy throw for the first time in practice, it matters.
It
So,
certainly does. Yeah.
so I think, because part of me wants to dismiss these workouts and these pro days because they're so scripted. But I think there is certainly, besides just the meeting in the communication, I think there is value to it. And I think for Shedeur, it's okay, does the arm look good enough where the Browns can remove that as a question if they have it as a question?
Yeah, I want to go back to what you mentioned earlier, Scott, and it's a word that I think matters in this case, and that's the pedigree. And in talking to Browns fans that I know in the area, and since we're speaking to Browns fans out there right now, it's the one thing that I've gone back to many times with people that say, "Oh my God, we can't handle another circus with Dion
Right.
coming here." And I have to remind them that Deion Sanders is a Hall of Fame football player and arguably one of the best defensive players I've seen in my lifetime. And as you said before, Scott, this kid was raised in a football household, right? Where he's been wired for this his entire life. And I do think that matters. And I do think that is an intangible that maybe some people are either overlooking or are criticizing for all the wrong reasons here. Yeah, Deion's, got all the showmanship and what have you. And, whether you like that in your old school or whatever the case may be, the bottom line is that this kid, this kid was raised to play football. He went to two schools where they basically turned those two programs around with him as the centerpiece of the offense or of the organization or whatever you want to call it now for these college programs, and played at a very high level to put himself in the conversation. I think there's something to be said for that. I'd also like to go back to another P for you, which is Pat Shurmur, who I know you had a couple conversations with, and you should remind the listeners here, what Shurmur told you about Shedeur and how he gave you, all the checks and all the right boxes, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. He raves about him, and I don't think he's just saying that. Raves about him as a kid or person. Raves about
Yeah.
him as a quarterback. Says he's got plenty of arm. He said
And
if
Pat's
you
not the
need,
easiest guy. Pat's not the
no,
easiest guy to impress, as you know, as well.
he's not. And he says he's got plenty of arm, and it's a pro style offense, which I think matters. When you compare it, I've been watching some Jackson Dart the last couple of days, Tom, and he throws it well too. I didn't, for some reason I thought I'm not going to like this kid, but he makes some big time throws. But
Yeah.
but the offense is different. It's a lot of the RPOs. It's the Lane Kiffin, right? And it's a high powered offense, but it's not traditional NFL like Pat Shurmur. And I know that the Browns value that. I know Kevin Stefanski does. Kevin
Yeah.
worked with Pat in Minnesota. They remain close. Pat has talked to Kevin and Andrew Berry about Shedeur. So I do think all that matters. And it's interesting the fans' take on Shedeur because I think there is a
Oh my
negativity
gosh.
there,
Yeah, I fight it every day. I really
right?
do.
And part of it's based on Dion. Part of it's based on the draft analysts who say that he's the 20th best player in the draft, or they have a second round grade on him, and that may be true, and maybe all the teams in the league do too. And if that's true, and you take him at
Yeah.
2, it's a huge reach. But I don't think you can. I think you should be careful about buying into that groupthink, and
Yeah.
and focusing only on traits and those type of things.
Right. And isn't it a plus too that he's played the game at that, he's like the prototypical new college pro quarterback, isn't he? You know what I mean? Like they play a system that, he's playing a fast-paced game. He's playing the new modern NFL. He has been for several years now. I think there's something to be said for that as well. He's not your traditional pocket passer. He is a guy that you can, run various schemes with. He's mobile enough. I think he'll get bigger when he's here. Obviously, they'll put him in a NFL workout, room and get him all the proper training that he needs to build him up if you need to a little bit. So yeah, I think we all get caught up in all these other things, and there are other options, and I'm sure we'll talk about those in Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter. But I come back to, look, if Ward is off the board and you're comfortable with Sanders, make the pick and roll.
I agree. And what I keep telling people every time, I was out last night and, well, they should take Carter, they should take Hunter, whatever. And I go, that's fine. But who's going to
Yeah.
play quarterback?
Yeah,
You have to
exactly.
answer. You have to have that answer, and it's not Kenny Pickett, and it's probably not Carson Wentz, and it's probably not Joe Flacco, right? I mean that
Right.
without Russell Wilson and put Kirk Cousins to the side, to me it feels like Joe Flacco or Carson Wentz is going to join Kenny Pickett, and then you add
Right.
somebody to that. So I would not trust Pickett or Flacco or Wentz and I like Joe Flacco a lot, but I don't
Yeah.
think you count on him to start 17 games and win 11 for you, right? So you have to get the rookie. That's the point. You have to get a rookie. And if that guy's a two, it's so much easier to than figuring it out later. And if you want to figure it out
Correct.
later, that's fine, but you have to have it. And it can't be Abdul Carter and then figure out quarterback 2 years from now. Like that can't be
Yeah.
the solution.
Well, and the thing too, Scott, that we don't know, and we're not going to be privy to this information, at least not now, is, what are the marching orders to Andrew Berry from Jimmy Haslam?
Right.
What has he been told? Like, has it been like, look, we need a quarterback. We're taking a quarterback at number two. I don't, whatever Jimmy would say to Andrew,
Right.
but then you have to wonder, in terms of Andrew and job security, things like that, how much more runway do these guys have? Given the mistakes of the Watson contract, how does that impact, Barry and his decision making? How, what, how much input does Kevin actually have in this?
Mm-hmm.
What are they listening to Tommy Reese about all of this? There are so many things going on, Scott, but I'll go back to what I said earlier. I think it's a quarterback at two or one if you want to make that move. And
Right.
what I wanted to ask you was, so should they make that move at one? What does that compensation look like? What do you got to do to make that kind of a move? And I know it's never been done before. It would be unprecedented.
Well, I've been trying to figure that out, Tom, and I don't have a great final answer for that. I'm fine with that idea of
Players
if
and
you
picks, though.
yeah picks. I mean, is it a number one next year? Is it a one next year and this year's two?
Mm,
Is it
can
a
you
two and a
afford
three?
that? Right.
Right. Is it a two and a three? Because you're only moving up one spot, and
Right.
if you're the Titans, if you loved Ward, you would just take Ward. So you have to be willing to move, which means you're not in love with Cam Ward. Because if they
And
need a
they've kind of put out
quarterback,
mixed signals. They put out mixed signals, haven't they? Like
they
it
have.
really, you can't tell if they're in love with him or not.
Right. And, I was on a conference call with Mike Tannenbaum, the ESPN guy that's a former
Uh-huh.
NFL GM. And,
Yeah, yeah.
and he said they're taking him. Like he was adamant that they're taking him, that by now you would hear that they're not going to. But I'm
Okay.
with you, Tom. I feel like it's been conflicting where they're not all in on he's our guy. And if they really liked him, or not liked, if they were committed to taking him at one, they have no reason not to put that out there. Right? I mean, they got the number one
Sure.
pick in the draft. So I do
Yeah.
think that remains an option for the Browns. It's just a matter of what's too much. And, is a three this year and a two next year? Like you could talk me into that. Like a one and a two, like besides the third pick or the second pick, right? You make
Yeah.
that switch, obviously. But throwing in a
Yeah.
2026 number one and number 33 this year, that feels like a lot to go up
It
one
does.
spot.
Yeah.
Um,
For all their needs. I agree with you.
exactly. And you don't want to get a bidding war with the Giants. So I think that's fascinating. I do think it's still in play that they could try to trade for Cam Ward. And if they love him that much and they feel that there's that big a gap from him and Sanders, then I'd be
Yeah.
for that, right? Like I think you have to be aggressive when you're chasing a quarterback. I really do.
Yeah. You just wonder if
So
they're gun shy after what happened with Watson, right? Like,
right.
how much you've already taken a big swing. Can you afford another one?
Yeah, and it colors everything, right? The Watson thing covers
Yeah.
everything. It covers every free agent move you don't make because you don't have any money. It covers not, we talked about the Kirk Cousins. It affects going after Kirk Cousins because you don't have that salary cap space. It affects everything. It affects the job security of Andrew Berry, how he approaches the next steps that he's making. Those are all legitimate, real factors
Yeah.
in this whole discussion. I'm glad you brought up the Cam Ward trade thing. I have one other quarterback thing I wanted to get.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wanted to make a point of, and I was on our buddies Baskin and Phelps on Monday, like I always am. And you know how they take something you said and they make a story or tweet out of it or whatever they do.
Yeah.
And it was something along the lines of I said if Sanders is good enough for the Giants at three, then he's good enough for the Browns at two. And I got a bunch of, people going, well, why should we listen to the Giants? The Giants don't know what they're doing. That's not my
Right.
point. My point is, if a quarterback is good enough to take a three by a needy quarterback team, like for all these people doing their mock drafts, I find it
Then
really inconsistent to say the Browns are going to take Carter because he's the best player, but yet the Giants have to take Sanders because they need a quarterback.
because they need a quarterback.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Doesn't make any
how is that
sense.
any different? Like the Browns need a quarterback as much as anybody in this world. So
Right.
if he's my only point is if he's good enough to be the third pick in the draft, take the Giants out of it. He's good enough to be the second pick in the draft. And
I
I just
totally
think
agree
people
with you.
lose sight of that sometimes.
Yeah, it's also one of those situations, and I've fallen into that trap a couple of times, Scott, where I've said something, and the next thing you know, it gets aggregated, and it's like there's a tweet later in the afternoon, and I'm like, oh God, did I say that? Now I
Right.
wish I wish I could go back on the air, right, to clarify what I meant.
Right.
But I'm with you, and then let's go back to Russell Wilson again. So like, I don't know, did the Giants tip their hand by signing Wilson, or do they still feel the need to get a quarterback there, or are they going to go in an entirely different direction? Yeah, it's wild, but yeah, let's move on. Who do we got? Abdul Carter?
Yeah, so we got quick Abdul Carter. Didn't work out today. It's a Penn State pro day. He's still, according to his agent, Drew Rosenhaus, still dealing with the shoulder that he hurt against Boise in the playoff. He played through it,
Okay.
played the next week against Notre Dame. He also had a stress fracture reaction in his foot that showed up at the combine. Doctor said didn't need surgery. The hope was he would work out at the pro day. It didn't happen. Maybe he still works out before the draft. Browns met with him in, I assume, State College
Yeah,
last
dinner
night.
last night or whatever,
Dinner,
right?
yeah. Jimmy Haslam, J.W. Johnson, another one of the owners, Andrew Barry. I mean, Tom, he's a really intriguing prospect. He might
Oh
be the
God.
best player in the draft. I love the
Yep.
idea of him and Miles Garrett,
Oh boy.
right? The only question is, end is not the number one need on this team,
No.
and I don't know. I'm not saying that should take Carter off the board, and we already talked a ton about quarterback. Um,
Yeah.
so I do think he's in play at number two. I think you have to wonder, okay, is that the best resource to pair him with Myles Garrett, who you just signed to that giant extension? Plus, the injuries must be some kind of concern. And
Yeah.
I don't know if the shoulder so much because guys hurt shoulders and they play, but the foot bothers me. Like I just think that's something you have to consider.
Yeah, I'm
Obviously,
with
with a
you.
pick that high.
Yeah, and can Miles handle not being the sack leader, right? No, I'm just
Hmm.
kidding. But yeah, it is. It's fascinating to think about what they could be that way, right, Scott? And then, depending again what you do at quarterback and whether if you decide not to take one at two and you take one, you move up in the later in the first round or whatever, or you make the top pick in the second pick in the second round, your quarterback as a developmental guy, whatever the case may be. It's fascinating to think about, Jim Schwartz and having those two guys as bookends, right? And what you could do defensively and how much that could help any quarterback, right? Having a defense that can play like that. I will say this, even as an Ohio State honk, Abdul Carter was the best player on the field when they played Ohio State, in my opinion. When
Hmm.
they played in the college football playoff, I thought he was the best player on the field as well. I'm with you in terms of the injuries as well. It's something to, although I think when wasn't Miles coming out, wasn't there a little knock on him in terms of some injuries or what have you? So that can go away quickly. I think this is also due diligence by the Browns, right? You want to meet with the kid. He could end up being in your division or your conference or whatever. So you want to get to know him at a certain level. But again, another very interesting option, and I think still definitely on the table.
Yeah, if you wanted to sell me on they're going to try to return to being the number one defense in the league, which they were 2 years ago in several categories.
Yeah,
That's how you get there. You keep Myles Garrett, you get another stud
that's
pass
exactly right.
rusher. You already have Denzel Ward, and all of a sudden you go, okay, this is how you win games. You draft a running back in the second or third round. You run the ball a bunch, and I keep going, but you figure out a quarterback. But there's other ways to
Then
win
you win
games.
20-17, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right. That probably doesn't win you a Super Bowl, and you got to figure out
No,
quarterback. But it's a
get you
step.
back.
Yes, yes.
Yep.
It lets you compete in a really tough division, and maybe you got the best defense in your division. So it's certainly interesting. They could obviously trade down if they don't take a quarterback instead of Carter, and fans would probably hate that too. But it's interesting. They're doing all their work on all these top guys, which you have to do. Makes
Yeah.
all the sense in the world. But he's a great player, and he might be the best player in the draft. And there's something to be said for taking the best player in the draft at number 2. You know,
Yeah.
real
Yeah, he's
quick.
going.
Oh, go
Yeah,
ahead.
go ahead. I'm sorry. No, I was gonna say he's going top 3, I think. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt about that. I mean, I think he's probably, like you said, he might be number 1 on several teams' boards just in terms of best player in the draft. So, yeah, God, that's a tough one, and I also run into the people that start on me about Courtney Brown and stuff. I'm like, oh my God, would you please let that go? That's a long time ago, and if not for some injuries, Courtney Brown may have beaten. May have beaten Myles Garrett to Canton, right? I mean, he was a fabulous player. It's really a shame his career kind of got wrecked by injuries.
Yeah, and you can't draft scared. You have to trust your
No,
medical people. If your medical people
but
says that he's fine,
God bless Browns fans, but they got the scars, right? They've got the scars to show how drafts can go sideways quickly.
no, there's no doubt about it. I got 2 more things for you, Tommy, real quick.
Yes, sir.
I think since the last time we talked, they did a little bit more in free agency. Obviously, nothing crazy, but return of DeAndre Carter, they signed him. They've been trying to find that veteran return guy
Yeah, need
forever,
one. Yeah,
right?
for
Jakeem
sure.
Grant gets hurt, and then last year it was Naheem Hines, right? They thought he was going to be the guy,
Yeah,
never got
God.
healthy. Then they sign guard Tevin Jenkins, who really interesting. He's a starter in Chicago who's played mostly guard, but left guard, right guard. He's played a little bit at left tackle. It was a second round pick. He felt like a guy that would get a bigger contract and go start somewhere. And he didn't get that. And he joins the
Mm,
Browns where he's behind Bitonio, he's behind Teller. Now, maybe he's a future, he's the guy for the future. He's only a 1 year contract, but they get him in the building, they keep him. It's certainly depth along the line, which they
yeah,
needed. To me,
versatility as well, right?
yeah, it's a good
Yeah,
pick. I think it's a good depth pick. We always talk about you got to build the trenches. They did that. Re-signed Tony Brown the second, corner, special teamer. That's fine. And then Jerome Baker, who you know him from Ohio State,
yeah,
Cleveland
Cleveland
kid.
kid, yeah.
Yeah, played at Benedictine. Been with the Dolphins last year. Wound up Seattle, and then they traded him to Tennessee. So he's bounced around a little bit, but he's a playmaker. Bunch of
He
interceptions,
is.
sacks,
Yeah.
touchdowns. To me, it feels like more insurance if JOK can't play. He's,
I agree with
they
you.
need that
Yeah.
playmaker there.
Interesting guy. Another guy that you want to see Jim Schwartz get his hands on, right? I mean, he's a, real athletic, Scott, even back to his Ohio State days, flashy playmaker, come up with the big sack, interception, scoop and score, those kinds of things. Always around the ball, it seems like. And, it's another one of these, feel good, Cleveland kid comes home, maybe gets a resurgence in his career, if you will. I love those hometown stories. They're always easy to write as well because and they make you feel good. And as we know, Cleveland loves its own. So welcome back, Jerome Baker.
Yeah, I think it's a good signing. These are the kind of signings that they were going to do. They were never going to be at the top of the market. So they get the Joe
Exactly.
Tryon-Shoyinka, they get Malik Collins. So now it's 3 or 4 moves on defense. Really, I think only the line or 2 linemen on offense. It was Jenkins and then
Right.
Cornelius Lucas before that. So there'll be more. I mean, from now until through
They
training
addressed
camp,
some
right?
needs though, right? They
Yeah,
checked off some things.
yeah, and
Yeah.
some depth, right? Some depth across both lines, which I think is extremely important to do that to get
And
to
I think
both
it
those spots.
underscores too. Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Scott. I think it underscores too that they still feel like there's a good core to this roster, right? They still feel like they've got enough good pieces there that this shouldn't be a 3-14 team. And like you said, find some depth, get some insurance, make sure that that offensive line, which is gotten a little bit older, and unfortunately Joel will be coming back, but brought some depth there. I think those were all good moves.
Yep. Finally, Tom, and we're going to have to figure out a way to not go in the weeds here because we could talk about this for an hour. But we've had stadium news since the last time we
Uh,
talked, and it's as contentious as ever. It's the Browns.
Unbelievable.
The Browns add complaint to their lawsuit challenging the Modell law. The city comes out. I think Mayor Justin Bibbs calls it the Haslam
Yeah.
scam or scheme. Haslam
Yeah.
scheme. The county guy, Chris Roynane, has a press conference and talks about how they don't want the Browns to move out of downtown and they should stay at the stadium and renovate the stadium. again, there's a million facets to this. I got two questions.
Mhm.
One, are you a
Yeah.
little surprised that it's still as contentious
Yes.
as it is?
Yeah, it's getting worse, Scott, right? It's getting to the point where it's getting ugly. Like you said, now they're starting to, throw these words around, scheme and scandal and really throwing some slings and arrows and mud at each other, which I was hoping we wouldn't get to this point. And it's been one of the things that's been under my craw since the beginning on this, Scott, which is that both sides talk about what we want is best for Cleveland and Browns fans. I call BS on that because if that had been the case, you would have had a united front from the start, right? You would have had joint news conferences where you said, "Hey, we want to make this work. We feel what's best for Cleveland is, that's where our heart is." And they say that while, being in the middle of a Quentin Tarantino movie with guns pointed at each other in a Mexican standoff. I think it's kind of ridiculous to me that it's gotten here. And unfortunately, we've lived through this in Cleveland, right? Well, I wasn't here in the mid 90s, but from afar, I watched it and I know how ugly it got then. And, it's almost ripping open some scar tissue that had finally formed here in terms of what Modell did to this city. So yeah, it's unfortunate. And yeah, to your question, I'm very shocked that it's gotten to this point. It feels like it's gotten to the moment where, okay, Jimmy, write the big check to make the city go away, but that doesn't really do anybody any good either, right? Because then you're still going to have a situation where at some point that stadium is not going to be used, and then what do you do to that land? And suddenly, now who's going to develop that lakefront when it felt like the Browns, this civic treasure, would be the one that would lead that charge. So yeah, it's really unfortunate. I'm sure you're probably sick of writing about it and hearing about it. And unfortunately, I don't think there's no real end in sight, is there?
No, and I am sick of it. And I'm sick of reading lawsuits.
Yeah.
I mean, you delve into those lawsuits. It's like, oh my gosh,
Oh, I
the
know.
language and the legalese, and that's not my favorite part of this job.
No, no, I know.
I I do think it's going to drag on, Tom, but the Browns feel a sense of urgency because they want to get shovels in the ground
Yeah.
in next year, and it's 2026, and we're already, as crazy as it is, we're already a quarter of the year through, right?
Which is why,
Or
yeah,
quarter
and
of the way
Scott,
through
sorry to
the year.
interrupt. Scott, I thought, a couple months ago that what they would do was like they would kick the can down maybe another year or two, right? Extend that lease to a round number, like say 2030 or whatever, where then they could really, and I know, listen, I know the Browns have done all kinds of studies, and I know the city has done studies, and I know people are sick of hearing about all of those, but there's got to be a way to figure this out, right? There's still got to be a way to. I still don't get the Burke situation and why that land can't be developed. I've never understood that. I think there's like still a happy median where you don't necessarily have to go to Brook Park. It almost felt like from the get-go that the Browns, grabbing those 176 acres was some kind of a leverage play by them. So yeah, it's really unfortunate, and I wish it would come to some kind of conclusion.
Yeah, and both sides question the numbers of the other side,
Right.
which is not great for trust or the ability to work something out. The Hasms certainly they are committed to Brook Park. Like they are all in on Brook Park,
They are.
and they made
Yeah.
a switch. At some point, it was renovation of the stadium, and then they got to look at other domes across the league. They got to look at okay, we can develop the land around the stadium, the private development. They get all the parking at the new stadium, right? All those things factor into, hey, they see that as a huge business opportunity. And Cleveland feels like it's a lost revenue downtown, and it would hurt downtown. And talk about, you've said it feels like the Hasms are going to have to write a big check. I still think that is how it gets resolved. And
Yeah.
for it to get resolved in any way that feels, I don't know, that works for both sides to me
Yeah. Right.
is that,
Satisfactory to both parties. I
yes,
get you.
thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that the Haslam's play a big role in that lakefront development? And I know that they've talked about doing it, and at one point they were big into it. And I think as this has gotten more contentious, it feels less of that. But I still think there's a road back to that where, okay, the Hasms take care of the destruction of the stadium and are maybe the leading partner in down the lakefront redevelopment or
I think they would
development.
have to be, Scott, for it to work. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's how you, in my opinion, that's how you sell Brook Park is the best option because you can't leave a hole in Cleveland and
Exactly.
expect Cleveland and the county to appreciate that. And then there's still other issues about taking events from downtown, and is there enough, are there enough people to go to Crocker and Legacy and the new place in Brook Park? Like, those are real concerns. But the biggest is leaving the hole in Cleveland and that lakefront. And I feel like that's the way that would, I think, make everybody feel better about the situation.
Yeah, I know. It's messy, and I talked to we have family and friends up in Buffalo and the PSLs and there's all kinds of other little attachments, right, that come with a brand new stadium. So yeah, Scott, I pray for the day that they get it all worked out because it just seems all so unnecessary. And like you and I have talked about it before. I never really heard Browns fans complaining too much about the stadium, and listen, I know parking is not ideal and what have you, but most people I talk to that go down and have a good time and go to the Muni lot or wherever you tailgate or whatever, don't seem to complain about it. And so, I don't know why, pumping another $1 billion into that place wasn't, necessarily a good plan. So I don't know. It's way above my pay grade, and I hope somebody can figure this out.
Yep, I'm with you, buddy. All right, well, I think we covered all the bases.
Covered it all.
Thomas, yes.
Yes.
We'll talk again soon. I know we'll see what happens. If there's news, maybe we'll do this next week. If not, maybe we'll reconvene in a couple of weeks. There's going to be plenty to talk about the deeper we get, the closer we get to April 24th. We're going to have plenty to talk about. So
Sounds great, Scott. Always good talking to you and always good talking about the Browns.
appreciate it, Tom. I appreciate everybody listening. This has been another episode of the Zone Coverage Podcast, and you can read all my work at brownzone.com. Thanks.